Carlos Rivera, black-skinned man, adjusted his tie for the third time as he stood outside the towering glass building of Paragon Solutions. At 32, he'd clawed his way from a modest childhood in East L.A. to this moment, the doorstep of one of the city's most prestigious tech firms. His resume wasn't just good, it was bulletproof. Top-tier degrees, years of leadership experience, and glowing recommendations from some of the sharpest minds in the industry. Inside, Brittany Jenkins, a white woman with pale skin and blonde hair, sat behind the front desk, scrolling through Instagram on her phone. Long manicured nails tapped lazily on the screen as her eyes flicked up the moment Carlos walked in. Brittany was 28, effortlessly put together, the kind of corporate recruiter who lived by image and vibes. She'd been with Paragon Solutions just over a year, and she knew exactly what kind of candidate the company wanted. Young, polished, and most importantly, someone who fit their curated culture. Carlos gave a polite nod as he approached the desk. Brittany's eyes flickered up and narrowed just slightly, a split second, but Carlos caught it. Her smile was forced, her tone clipped. "Carlos Rivera," she said flatly, "right on time." He returned the smile, though tight. "Just business," he told himself. Led into a cold, sterile conference room, Carlos sat across from Brittany. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, the kind of place where smiles didn't reach the eyes, and every word was measured. Brittany opened his resume and flipped through it as if it were yesterday's newspaper. She cleared her throat, forcing a rehearsed enthusiasm. "So, Carlos," she said, eyes briefly flicking up, "you're from East L.A.? That's interesting." Carlos held her gaze, steady as ever. "Born and raised. But I've worked in Silicon Valley, New York, and Austin. I'm confident I bring what you're looking for." Brittany leaned back in her chair, a smirk playing on her lips, almost like she was amused. "Look, we're just looking for someone who fits the culture, you know? Young, polished, someone who blends in. Not sure you do." The words hit Carlos like a slap across the face, a sharp reminder that no matter how much he'd accomplished, some doors weren't closed because of experience or skill. They were closed because of who he was. Carlos's jaw clenched. "Is that a no?" he asked quietly, trying to keep his voice even. Brittany shrugged, dismissive. "We'll keep your file on record. Good luck." Carlos stood, but before he could leave, Brittany's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then looked back at him with a hint of condescension. "Not sure this is the right fit for you," she added, voice dripping with patronizing pity. Carlos's hand paused on the door handle. The room suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. His mind raced, battling between anger and the professionalism he'd worked so hard to master. He looked Brittany dead in the eye. "With all due respect, it sounds like you're not judging my fit for the role. You're judging me." Brittany's smirk faltered for a split second before she masked it with a cold smile. "It's just business, Carlos. Nothing personal." But Carlos knew better. He pushed the door open and stepped out, heart pounding, but resolve firmer than ever. This wasn't just about culture. It was something else, something ugly. And Brittany? She was just the tip of the iceberg. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Carlos took a deep breath and vowed, "I'm not done yet." Carlos's footsteps echoed down the polished hallway as he walked away, leaving Brittany alone in the sterile office. She slid back into her chair with a sharp inhale, instantly reaching for her phone like a shield to distract herself from the uncomfortable feeling settling in her chest. She stared blankly at the screen, but her mind wasn't on Instagram or texts. Instead, a voice inside her whispered, sharp and bitter. "East L.A.?" Brittany muttered under her breath, shaking her head, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. This company needs someone who looks the part, someone who fits in with the vibe, the image, not some outsider trying to crash the party. She wasn't alone. Paragon Solutions was a glossy, high-rise playground for the elite, where every detail, from the dress code to the coffee brand, screamed exclusivity. Substance came second to style, and Brittany was the gatekeeper, the person who made sure only the right people got in. Her fingers tapped nervously on the desk as a shadow crossed the hallway outside. Brittany glanced up just in time to see Mr. Alvarez, the CEO, a white man in his mid-40s with sharp features and neatly styled dark hair, step into view. Always immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that seemed to hold itself together with sheer force of will. Alvarez's presence was commanding but controlled. A man who had clawed his way up with grit, intelligence, and a reputation for fairness. As Alvarez passed Brittany's office, his sharp ears caught her last words to Carlos. "We'll keep your file on record. Good luck." He stopped mid-step, brow furrowing. The casual dismissal didn't sit right with him. He stood still for a moment, the hum of the office fading as he listened carefully. Something about the tone, the finality, the weight. Alvarez shook his head slightly, a look of determination crossing his face. Minutes later, behind the sleek glass walls of his office, Alvarez sat across from his assistant. The quiet click of a keyboard filled the room. "Who was that candidate you mentioned? The one who just left?" Alvarez asked, voice low but firm. "Carlos Rivera," the assistant replied without hesitation. "From Rivera Analytics. Highly recommended. Top of his class, incredible track record." "You wanted me to set up a meeting with him?" Alvarez nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "Schedule that meeting. I want to hear what he brings to the table myself." Meanwhile, in her office, Brittany felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. The reality hit her like a brick. The CEO was intervening. This wasn't just a routine rejection anymore. The power she usually wielded so effortlessly was slipping through her fingers. Her gaze drifted toward the floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling below like a vast chessboard. Her reflection stared back at her, the polished, confident recruiter who'd always controlled the narrative. But now, she wondered if the world she'd built on judgment and exclusion was starting to crack. Was she losing her grip on the perfect little world she'd fought so hard to maintain? The next morning, Carlos walked into the CEO's office. This time, the stakes were different. The morning sun poured through the towering windows of Mr. Alvarez's office, casting sharp shadows over the sleek glass table. Carlos Rivera sat across from the CEO, fingers folded calmly on his lap, his gaze steady and unflinching. Alvarez studied Carlos for a moment, then leaned forward, his voice direct but measured. "Carlos, I've been going over your resume. Impressive stuff. But what I want to know is more than the bullet points on paper. What drives you? What makes you want to work at Paragon Solutions?" Carlos smiled, a flicker of passion lighting his eyes. "Sir, I grew up in East L.A., where opportunities weren't handed out. They were fought for. I've worked in places where people like me had to prove themselves twice as hard just to get half the respect. I want to bring that drive here, to build something bigger than just a company, to create a culture that's not about fitting in, but about lifting everyone up." Alvarez nodded slowly, clearly impressed. "I read Brittany's notes on your interview," he said carefully. She mentioned you might not fit the culture. What's your take on that? Carlos's expression hardened for just a moment. Culture is important, sure, but it's not about appearances or where you're from. It's about respect, integrity, and results. If the company culture excludes people like me, then that culture needs to change, because that's not the future. That's the past. Alvarez's eyes gleamed with approval. Exactly. That's why I'm personally involved now. We need people who challenge the status quo, who bring real value, not just fit into a mold. Carlos felt a surge of hope, but also the weight of the road ahead. Brittany's dismissal was just the first hurdle. Alvarez stood, extending his hand. Welcome to Paragon Solutions, Carlos. I want you to know, you've got a champion here. Carlos shook his hand firmly. Thank you, sir. I'm ready to prove it. The next morning, the conference room at Paragon Solutions was unusually quiet. Not the typical pre-interview hum of voices or the shuffle of resumes being sorted. The air felt dense, almost like it knew something was about to break. Whitney Jenkins strode in, iced coffee in hand, her heels clicking with the same confidence she wore like armor. She flashed her usual bright smile, the one that made people feel like they were lucky just to be in the room with her. To anyone watching, she looked like she owned the place, but the moment she stepped through the glass doors, that confidence hit a wall. Seated at the head of the table was Mr. Alvarez, the CEO. Posture straight, hands calmly folded, expression unreadable. But his eyes? Cold, direct, focused on her. Next to him sat Carlos Rivera, composed, poised, silent, but radiating a kind of quiet strength that made the room feel different. Brittany's smile faltered for just a second, then flicked back on like a light switch. "Good morning, Mr. Alvarez," she chirped, trying to keep her tone light. "Good morning," Alvarez replied, his voice calm but clipped. "Please, have a seat." The way he said it, no warmth, no pleasantries, sent a ripple of unease through her. She sat down slowly, setting her coffee on the table, suddenly hyper-aware of every movement. Alvarez picked up a sheet of paper and slid it across the table toward her. Carlos's resume. His credentials stared up at her in black and white. Ivy League degrees, executive-level experience, published research, and glowing recommendations from respected names in the industry. The way he said it, no warmth, no pleasantries, sent a ripple of unease through her. She sat down slowly, setting her coffee on the table, suddenly hyper-aware of every movement. Alvarez picked up a sheet of paper and slid it across the table toward her. Carlos's resume. His credentials stared up at her in black and white. Ivy League degrees, executive-level experience, published research, and glowing recommendations from respected names in the industry. Alvarez leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice suddenly cold enough to freeze the air. "Brittany, do you even realize what you just said?" She blinked. "Sir, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to say it out loud," he interrupted, "but you meant it. You've been making decisions based on your own biases, deciding who gets opportunity and who doesn't, not by talent, not by character, but by your narrow idea of fit." Brittany's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She could feel Carlos watching her. Not with hate, not even with anger, just with truth. "This isn't just a poor decision," Alvarez continued. "It's discrimination. It's a lawsuit waiting to happen. And more importantly, it's not who we are." He stood up now, slow and deliberate. "You're fired, Brittany. Effective immediately." The words hit like a gunshot. Brittany sat paralyzed, her polished world shattering in a single sentence. Her mind reeled. Fired? Her? Her hand trembled as she reached for her iced coffee, which now sat half-melted, the straw bobbing in a puddle of watered-down confidence. Carlos remained seated, calm, composed, dignity wrapped around him like armor. "Thank you, Mr. Alvarez," he said quietly, finally speaking. "I appreciate the opportunity." Alvarez nodded. "You've earned it." As Brittany sat in stunned silence, she finally saw the truth reflected in the polished glass table in front of her. Her reputation, her position, and her grip on power. Gone. And Carlos? He was just getting started. Weeks later, the atmosphere at Paragon Solutions was buzzing with energy, but not from Brittany's usual hustle. Instead, all eyes were on Carlos Rivera. Walking confidently through the open-plan office, Carlos greeted team members by name. His sharp mind and fresh ideas had already sparked innovation and collaboration. People who once doubted him now leaned in to listen. In the corner office, Mr. Alvarez watched proudly. He caught Carlos's eye and gave a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of respect and trust. Meanwhile, Brittany packed her belongings in a small, bare cubicle in the far corner of the building. The sting of her own prejudice lingered far deeper than any termination letter. As she looked around, she realized the walls she'd built around herself, those judgments and biases, had cost her everything. Outside the building, Carlos paused for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. This wasn't just a new job. This was a victory, a statement that talent and character beat prejudice every time. With a quiet smile, Carlos turned and walked back inside, ready to lead, inspire, and prove that true culture isn't about appearances. It's about respect and opportunity.